So, in this next part of the program, I really wanted to respond to some interesting comments and criticisms that I got regarding the story that I covered last week about Louis Lang. Just to recap real quick, Louis Lang is a gentleman in South Carolina. He had a problem with diabetes, and he was also a smoker. It started affecting the small blood vessels in his brain and in his eyes, and he was starting to lose his vision. Now, Mr. Lang is one of those people who does not believe in health insurance. He paid all of his medical bills up until this point, and even this current health situation wiped out his savings. But as he was starting to lose more and more of his vision, and as he was going broke, he realized that he was past the deadline for enrolling in Obamacare through the federal exchange. Because he lives in South Carolina, a state that has not expanded Medicaid, he did not qualify for that state's Medicaid program. And so he is now in the coverage gap. One of the 4 million Americans or 8 million Americans that we have talked about on this program repeatedly. And, Mr. Lang turned to the internet and started a GoFundMe fundraiser to raise money to help him pay for his medical bills. And to date, it looks like, last week I told you guys that he has $17,000 out of the $30,000 that he needs. Today, that number is up to $21,000. And I did mention that I had donated $10 to his fundraiser, and this actually triggered a lot of interesting responses. There were people who were upset at me for doing this because they felt that I was enabling his bad behavior or his bad principles. Other people were upset about, is this really sustainable? Because, there are a lot of Mr. Langs out there. And, how are you going to possibly, make this a method of taking care of their healthcare needs? So to all the, criticism and all of that, I do want to take some time to address that because there are some, perfectly valid points and some really not so valid points that were brought up in the comments that I've heard so far. So my first point is that whenever I have talked about health justice for all on this program, I meant all. I did not mean, health justice for all who agree with my, progressive principles. I do not mean health justice for all who are perfect in their ideologies and perfect in their words and perfect in their actions. If we're going to have those kinds of litmus tests before we can offer health justice to our fellow Americans and our brothers and sisters, I'm afraid I can't stand for that. At the end of the day, Mr. Lang is a child of God just like me, and my compassion made me reach out and do the little bit that I can. I believe that, his story has already made its point. I don't think that Aesop, when he wrote The Tortoise and the Hare, meant to have additional chapters. It wasn't like you learn the lesson of slow and steady wins the race, and then you get to be a dick about it after you win the race. Like, that's not the way that, Aesop intended that story to go. And I kind of feel like, the story of Mr. Lang has made its point. I don't necessarily need Mr. Lang to convert his views in order for me to help him. And I really hope that when we understand the concept of health justice for all, that we mean all. We don't necessarily mean just the people who agree with us or just the people who like us. In fact, that's kind of how the opposition works. And quite frankly, I think we're better than that. And I don't need Mr. Lang to change his position. And I actually feel that probably the most persuasive form of communication and action is to set a good example. By setting an example that I, as a progressive, will reach out to somebody like Mr. Lang and do what I can to help him out, I think that demonstrates that, it isn't just principle, that we actually participate, that we practice what we preach. So, for people who, are needing a reminder about health justice for all means all. My second point is that by saying all this, I don't mean to shut down any discussion. I actually think that there were some valuable discussions going on right on Mr. Lang's fundraiser page. I think it was valuable to see people go back and forth commenting on, is this sustainable? Is this sustainable for somebody like Mr. Lang to start a fundraiser when he, runs into financial troubles for his health? And to me, like, that's a valid question, because yeah, today it's Louis Lang and tomorrow it's Walter White, who, is going to die of lung cancer and might start cooking meth if we don't go and help him out. And I get it, like, there will as long as this system endures, there will always be another, Louis Lang. And how do we possibly make it sustainable if all we're doing is charity? And I have said on the show before that as much as I respect charity, charity is not a sustainable way of financing healthcare, of delivering healthcare, or making, or building health justice for all. So I perfectly respect that argument. At the end of the day, though, I feel that as all these arguments go back and forth, if Mr. Lang loses his vision, I'm really not happy about those discussions. As a doctor, I can tell you that it bothered me to no end as a medical student, as a resident, when I would watch, colleagues have endless discussions going on and on and on, talking and talking and talking. Meanwhile, there is a person here who needs help, and it is within our reach to help this person. I feel that, I totally want valid discussions to go on, but at the end of the day, if it results in inaction and Mr. Lang loses his vision, I can't accept that. I can't accept that, somebody is going to lose their vision in the wealthiest country on earth when we're perfectly capable of doing something, for someone. And I do feel that, the people who are, like, questioning the sustainability of this approach, sometimes they have, I think, an attitude where they say, well, if we can't do something for everybody, then we shouldn't do, something for anyone. And I don't really get that. I kind of feel like, a good sustainability argument can be had. And in the meantime, do what you can for the people that are directly in front of you. To me, this has always been the challenge of the Affordable Care Act. Even if every state had expanded Medicaid, even if we had, done everything in the letter of the law, I would still be here talking to you about undocumented immigrants. I would still be here talking to you about the efficiency with which we deliver all of these things, because there's always still that work to be done. Just because the law isn't perfect doesn't mean that, you shouldn't do something in the now. And, so yes, I respect the sustainability agreements, but in the meantime, I can't in my heart let Mr. Lang go blind while we're just having, like, discussions. My third point: for the people who really feel the need to continue this blame and shame thing, what I would ask of you is take that finger of blame and shame and point it towards South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley and South Carolina legislators. These are the people who have constructed the system and have allowed a system of injustice to keep persisting. Mr. Lang's story would never have been brought to any of our attention if he had lived in a state that had expanded Medicaid, that had a robust, health exchange for him to go and get some health insurance. He's in this situation because of where he lives. Yes, we all make bad choices. And as I said in my very first point, I'm not going to demand perfection out of everyone. I can't. As a doctor, I can't do that to patients. But what I can expect is that when we are in this world together, that we can live in systems that look after us even when we stumble, even when we make bad decisions, that we shouldn't suffer so direly for those decisions. So if you want to continue pointing that finger of blame and shame, point it towards Governor Nikki Haley. Point it towards the South Carolina state legislatures that continue to make South Carolina such a difficult place for people like Mr. Lang to get the most basic of health care. I think that is actually a valid place to take that frustration. I think that that's actually a productive way of helping these people and creating the sustainable system that we were talking about in my second point. So for folks who, have some issues with me helping out, Louis Lang, at least now you know where I'm coming from. And I hope that, this will, interest you in learning more about his situation, about other Americans like him, and doing something in the now to help our brothers and sisters as they need help now. And then to actually kind of ask those tough questions of, how did we get here? Why are we still like this in 2015 in America? I think that those are all valuable discussions to be had. But in the meantime, it's not enough just to talk. We have to walk. So, I mean, there's my reasoning for, for helping out Louis Lang. I know that it's not, I mean, the most polite way of handling this situation, but I felt like I owed you guys, my listeners, a bit of of an explanation for where my mind is coming from and what the values of this show are, because as much as I believe that, the people who gave, Mr. Lang his politics, the people who are like leading that ideology, I do want to see them defeated. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think that we necessarily have to destroy in order to defeat. I think that it's enough to defeat and then say, okay, you were wrong before, but now we need you to come back into the fold and be part of this perfect union called America. That's where I'm coming from with a lot of of my frustration on this show. I don't mean for our enemies to be destroyed. I mean for them to be defeated where they are wrong ideologically, and then to be brought back to the fold so that they can be part of our perfect union.